The sun was shining brightly as a special group of students rolled onto the school bus that Friday morning. There were 10 children in total, all with bright smiles and full of excitement. Each of them used a wheelchair, but that never stopped them from having fun or going on adventures. Their teachers, Miss Hannah, Miss Carla, and Mr. Bryan, had planned a special day trip to Spring River Park, a beautiful place filled with trees, birds, and a wide, calm river that curved the forest. The kids had been looking forward to this day for weeks. They wore colorful T-shirts and rainbow shades to stay easy to spot in the forest. They laughed and chatted with each other as the bus pulled away from the school parking lot. Parents waved goodbye, trusting that their children were in safe hands. The ride to the park took about an hour. When they arrived, the teachers helped each student off the bus and made sure all wheelchairs were checked and ready. The group took the trail that curved near the river. Everything seemed normal and happy. The students pointed out squirrels and birds. They stopped for snacks near a picnic area, and Mr. Bryan read them a story while Miss Hannah poured juice into small paper cups. Around noon, they continued on a trail that led deeper into the forest, planning to reach a small clearing where they would rest and then turn back. But that was the last time anyone ever saw the class. Later that evening, when the bus didn't return at the expected time, school staff began to worry. They called the teachers' phones, but there was no answer. One parent called 911, reporting that the class hadn't returned from their field trip. Within hours, a search began. Police officers, park rangers, and volunteers all gathered at Spring River Park. Flashlights scanned the dark woods, and dogs sniffed for any trace of the missing group. But there were no signs, no tire marks, no lost backpacks, no dropped phones. It was as if the entire group had disappeared without a trace. The next morning, the search continued. Helicopters flew over the forest, while drones were sent over the river. Still, nothing was found. People began to fear the worst. News spread quickly, and soon reporters were standing at the edge of the forest, broadcasting live. The parents of the children stood in a circle, crying and holding each other. Some prayed while others just stared into the woods in silence. How could a whole group of children and 3 adults vanish in the middle of the park? The forest had no history of danger, and the weather had been clear. There were no signs of a landslide or animal attack. Everyone was asking the same question: what happened? Just before sunset on the second day, a park ranger named Lee Jackson decided to search along a different part of the river, an area not usually open to visitors because the path was muddy and overgrown. Lee pushed through branches and waded through shallow water. That's when he saw something that stopped him cold. Floating in the water were several wheelchairs, empty, tilted at odd angles. Some had bright color frames, pink, green, blue, the same colors the students had chosen for their chairs. Lee's heart pounded as he stepped closer. He counted 8 chairs, all abandoned. Some were tangled in roots, others slowly drifting in the current. There were no students in sight. The water was quiet, and the forest was still. It looked like something terrible had happened, but there were still no answers. The children were gone, and all that remained were their empty wheelchairs, scattered like forgotten toys in the murky swamp. Ranger Lee's hands trembled as he reached for his radio. He had seen many strange things during his years working the park, but nothing like this. "I found them," he said in a shaky voice. "The wheelchairs, they're here, but there are no kids." The silence on the other end of the radio was thick. Then came the reply: "We're sending backup now. Stay where you are." Lee stood still, staring at the water. Each wheelchair looked as if it had been gently placed in the swamp, not crashed or tipped over in panic. There were no signs of struggle, no damage, just emptiness. Within minutes, more rangers and officers arrived at the spot. They marked the area and carefully pulled the wheelchairs from the water. One of the officers held up a small purple backpack with the name Emily written in white letters. Everyone grew quiet. This was real. The children had been here, but where were they now? As the news reached the parents, many of them rushed to the site. Police had to hold them back behind yellow tape. One mother, Mrs. Garza, fell to her knees and cried out for her son, Isaac. Another father, Mr. Brooks, stared at his daughter's chair and whispered her name. Reporters took photos from a distance, but even they seemed too stunned to speak much. The officers searched the area carefully. They used long sticks to poke through the muddy water, hoping to find clues, shoes, pieces of clothing, anything. Divers arrived and searched under the water, but there were no bodies, no footprints leading away, no paths through the trees. It was as if the children and their teachers had floated away into thin air. Back at the ranger station, investigators looked at the map of the park and traced the path the group had taken. A few security cameras at the entrance showed the bus arriving and the group heading toward the trail. After that, there were no more videos. One of the teachers had sent a photo to a friend just before noon. The children smiling near the riverbank. But that was it. Their phones had no signals, and their GPS trackers had all stopped at the same location. The swamp where the wheelchairs were found. It made no sense. If the group had been lost, they would have called for help or turned back. If they'd been attacked, there would be evidence. But nothing pointed to a clear reason for their disappearance. Some people began to suggest wild ideas. One older ranger claimed that long ago, the forest had been considered haunted by a native tribe that once lived near the river. He said they believed spirits guarded the swamp and didn't like people disturbing it. Of course, others dismissed this as silly talk. But still, something didn't feel right. Even animals avoided the area. No birds sang, and no insects buzzed near the water. It was too quiet. That night, a team stayed at the swamp to keep watch. They set up cameras and sat in silence. Around midnight, a soft humming sound came from the woods. It wasn't from an animal or a machine. It was a low, strange tune, like children singing from far away. The officers looked at each other, frozen. Then the sound faded, as if it had never happened. The next morning, one of the officers found small handprints in the mud a few feet away from the swamp. They were too small to be from an adult. One print had a tiny star drawn in the middle with what looked like purple ink. That was something Emily often did. She liked drawing stars on her hands. It gave the parents a small bit of hope. Maybe the children were still alive. But where? How had they left their wheelchairs behind? The search expanded, and now people began looking not just in the woods, but underground too, checking caves, tunnels, even old storm drains. Everyone had the same desperate wish, to find those children before it was too late. As the search moved into its third day, the entire country began watching the news. Pictures of the missing children filled every screen. Their smiling faces were shown alongside the swamp where their empty wheelchairs had been found. People all over the nation shared messages of support, praying for a miracle. In Spring River Park, the police had set up a large base camp. Tents covered computers, radios, food supplies, and maps. Volunteers brought sandwiches, flashlights, and warm clothes. But even with so many people looking, there were still no answers. The forest seemed to be hiding something no one could see or explain. Ranger Lee couldn't stop thinking about the strange humming sound from the night before. He asked if the audio equipment had picked up anything. When the tech team reviewed the recordings, they found something chilling. At exactly 12:17 a.m., the microphone had captured a soft, eerie melody. It sounded like children singing a lullaby, but the words were impossible to understand. They weren't in English. Some said it gave them goosebumps just to hear it. The sound was too slow, too smooth, and too sad. One expert was called in from the city to study the clip. He listened closely, then said it resembled an ancient tribal chant, but not from any known tribe. It was completely unknown. Meanwhile, a young woman named Sarah, who worked as a part-time botanist, had an idea. She had grown up near the park and remembered stories her grandfather used to tell. He spoke of a part of the forest that sank in on itself during heavy rain, forming a temporary hole in the ground. She thought maybe the children had somehow found this place. With permission, she and a small team hiked deep into the woods, beyond the marked trails. They followed old maps, compass readings, and signs of animal paths. It was quiet, but the trees grew thick and the air felt heavy. After 3 hours, they saw something strange. The ground ahead was cracked open, like a large sinkhole had formed and then dried up. At the bottom was a small cave-like entrance, barely visible unless you were looking for it. They called it in right away, and soon officers, dogs, and cameras arrived. They used ropes to climb down slowly. The entrance was tight, but just big enough for a small person to squeeze through. The dogs barked and whined, pulling toward the hole. A camera on a long stick was pushed inside, and the screen showed a narrow tunnel with muddy walls. Everyone held their breath. Then, in the corner of the screen, something moved. It was a drawing, crudely made on the cave wall. It showed stick figures, 10 small ones, 3 big ones, and a large tree with no leaves. One figure had a star on its hand. Another had a red scarf, just like Miss Carla always wore. People gasped. This was proof the children had been there. A rescue team prepared to go in. Because the tunnel was small, only 2 people could enter at a time. Ranger Lee volunteered to go first with a thin officer named Maya. They wore helmets with lights and carried walkie-talkies. Crawling through the tunnel was hard. The air was wet, and the walls dripped with water. Strange symbols covered the rock, none of which they understood. After about 30 feet, they found another drawing, this one showing a door made of roots, and behind it, children with closed eyes. "What is this place?" Maya whispered. Then they heard something behind them, a faint giggle. They turned quickly, shining their lights, but nothing was there, just the empty tunnel and the wet stone walls. They crawled deeper, following a breeze that smelled like flowers and smoke. Then the tunnel opened into a wider space. The walls sparkled with tiny lights, like stars glowing in the stone. In the middle of the room was a circle made of stones, and in the center of that circle lay something soft and pink, one of the missing children's jackets. Maya picked it up and whispered, "Emily." Suddenly, the lights flickered and the breeze stopped. The room felt alive, as if it was watching them. Lee reached for his radio to call in what they found, but the radio was dead. Both of them looked at each other, feeling fear rise in their chests. They had found something, but they had no idea if they would ever find a way back out. Ranger Lee and Officer Maya stood frozen in the glowing cave, unsure what to do next. The small pink jacket in Maya's hands was clear proof that the children had been there, but the silence that surrounded them was deep and strange, almost like it was pressing against their ears. The air felt thicker now, and the lights in the stone walls blinked slowly, like they were breathing. Maya carefully placed the jacket into her backpack and whispered, "We have to find them. They might be close." Lee nodded and shined his flashlight deeper into the cavern. Just past the circle of stones, there was another narrow passage, partly hidden behind hanging vines and twisted roots. It looked like no one had gone through it in many, many years. They moved carefully, pushing through the tight space. The air grew colder with every step, and the smell of flowers faded. It was replaced by something older, like damp wood and smoke. Then, after a few more steps, they entered a new chamber. This room was larger and darker, with a pool of still water in the middle. Around the edges of the pool were small wooden toys, cars, dolls, building blocks, all wet but perfectly arranged in a circle. And then they saw them. 10 small beds made of moss and leaves sat along one side of the chamber. On each bed was a child, sleeping soundly. Their faces were peaceful, their hands tucked under their heads. The 3 teachers were nearby, leaning against the cave wall, also asleep. None of them moved. None of them woke up. Maya ran forward and knelt beside one of the children. It was Isaac. She gently shook his shoulder and called his name, but he didn't wake. His chest moved slowly, like he was in a deep dream. Lee checked on Miss Hannah, who had a notebook clutched in her lap. He opened it and saw pages filled with drawings, trees, rivers, faces, and at the end, a strange symbol, a circle with 2 hands inside, one open and one closed. "We need to get help now," Lee said. "We've found them, but something's keeping them asleep." They tried their radios again. Still dead. There was only one option. They marked the tunnel with ribbons from their gear and quickly made their way back up to the surface. Once outside, they gasped for fresh air and waved down the officers waiting nearby. "We found them," Lee shouted. "They're alive, but asleep like under some spell." Medical teams rushed in, but only one doctor and a small team could fit through the tunnel at a time. They entered with oxygen tanks and stretchers. One by one, the children and teachers were carefully lifted out of the cave. It took hours, but by sunrise, everyone had been brought up. Doctors checked their vital signs. Everything was normal, except none of them would wake up. They were alive but trapped in deep sleep, like they were dreaming the same dream. Back at the hospital, the children were placed in special care rooms. Machines monitored their brain waves. Surprisingly, all the children had the same rhythm in their sleep. Slow, calm, and exactly the same. A sleep expert said he had never seen anything like it. It's as if they're all sharing the same dream, he said. Days passed. Then, on the fourth night, something happened. At exactly 12:17 a.m., all 10 children opened their eyes at the same time. The teachers woke up too. Nurses rushed in, asking questions, but the children looked around calmly. Then all said the same sentence. The tree said it's not time yet. And then, just like that, they went back to sleep. The town was stunned. People tried to make sense of what the children said. Some believed they had entered a spiritual world. Others thought it was some strange natural phenomenon. Scientists, historians, and even religious leaders visited the park to learn more. But no one could explain what had happened. The forest around Spring River Park was sealed off by the government, marked as a restricted zone. Ranger Lee left his job shortly after, saying, "There are places we were never meant to find." To this day, the children remain asleep, watched over by doctors and their parents. Their bodies are healthy, their hearts strong, but they sleep with smiles on their faces, as if living in a world better than this one. No one knows when they'll wake up or what they saw in the forest. But every night, at exactly 12:17 a.m., the same soft humming is heard near the swamp, and the wheelchairs, now clean and stored in a nearby shed, tremble just slightly, as if remembering the song of the trees. And those who hear it never forget it.